empathy is first and foremost an emotional skill, right? It's your ability to read, respond to emotion, or the subtle social signaling, which is always moderated by emotion. So if you don't understand your emotions, your empathy is always going to be kind of lopsided, right? And your empathy could very easily drop to zero in the presence of an emotion that you don't know how to work within yourself.
Welcome to Season 16 of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Thanks so much for watching or listening. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I am joined by Karla McLaren, who is an award-winning author, educator, workplace consultant, and social science researcher. Her groundbreaking 6 Essential Aspects of Empathy model highlights all the processes in healthy empathy and makes them understandable, accessible, and attainable for everyone. Her applied work, Dynamic Emotional Integration, is a groundbreaking process that reveals the genius and healing power within the emotional realm. Karla is the author of many books, including The Language of Emotions Workbook, The Art of Empathy, and Embracing Anxiety, and she is the developer of the online learning community at empathyacademy.org. Today, we're going to talk specifically about, and I hope you'll hold this up, Karla, the revised edition of The Languages of Emotions, what your feelings are trying to tell you, a book that you'll gain access to learn how to access the brilliant wisdom in your emotions and create a deeply meaningful, healing, and awakened life. Love that. Welcome to the show, Karla.
Thank you so much, Anita. It's great to talk with you again.
Same. So it's fun to have new conversations with repeat podcast guests, which means we're going to showcase a different part of your work. It's only happened twice. So welcome. Which just shows, I guess, like the breadth and the history of all the work that you've done in this space. Despite the fact that we've already talked before, I still think some newcomers to this episode would be interested in knowing about your backstory. So I always find it interesting to know, why are you drawn to this empathy work in the first place, and what's sort of the path that got you here?
What I would say, empathy and emotions are everything. They're everything. But the way that I got there was being a very unmanaged, hyper-empathic child. And the reason I developed that, my family tends to be pretty good trade empathy anyway. They're all artists and musicians and all that. But it's a sad story. It ended up well, but I was being molested by a neighbor for quite a long time, starting in toddlerhood. And it was sort of a way that the neighborhood worked. There was kind of the secret underlying truth of the neighborhood. So a lot of the little girls in the neighborhood were going over to that house for no good reason. And what I learned to do was turn up my empathy extremely high so that I could read the room, right? And I could see what was going on with him and what was going on with the little girls, and make decisions about what I was going to do that day, because it was a fact of the neighborhood. It was like an underlying, rhythm of the neighborhood. And so I became hyper empathic. And what that means is you sort of open too much to the world. You open too much to the emotions of others. And I ended up being a very hyperactive kid, like this constant energy, and a rageful child as well. I understand now from studying emotions that anger sets boundaries, and my rage was sort of the only way that I could set boundaries, right? I was very fortunate. My family just said, well, she's an angry child, instead of shaming me for being angry, right? I mean, that was unheard of. Most women have been shamed since before they were born about their anger. So I was able to work with these intense emotions. I had nightmares, panic, everything was going on in my little body, trying to process all of this that I was taking in. So, very difficult childhood. I was a very difficult child to raise, to teach. to be around. I was just on fire most of the time. As I got older, I began to understand that I wasn't going to make it if I didn't understand emotions, because I was in the deep boiling ocean of emotions. And so I was like, I'm going to understand these, damn it. And that began the whole thing. I'm going to understand emotions and empathy before they kill me. And I really did see emotions as a problem. And certainly in my life, they were a problem. There was nothing good about them. Many years later, realizing that emotions were not the problem, they were coming to address the problem. And it is very easy for people to get spun out like that and to have a lot of difficulties. And then the only thing they really feel is the intensity of the emotion. And they're like, emotions are terrible, right? Emotions are terrible. And so I was lucky to be sort of taken under the wing of the emotions and taught what they're about and what they do. So that, terrible backstory ended up being an origin story, but luckily it wasn't my supervillain origin story. It was my writer origin, my research origin. And so understanding now that emotions come to deal with the problem, they are not the problem, is huge. It's a huge awareness that I'm still working with every day, and understanding, okay, I'm feeling this. What is the message of that emotion? What does it do? How does it function? And then the way that connects with empathy is that empathy is first and foremost an emotional skill, right? It's your ability to read, respond to emotion, or the subtle social signaling, which is always moderated by emotion. So if you don't understand your emotions, your empathy is always going to be kind of lopsided, right? And your empathy could very easily drop to zero in the presence of an emotion that you don't know how to work within yourself. So you might be perfectly empathic, and then someone comes at you with some rage, and your empathy drops to zero right there, because rage is not allowed, or whatever the emotion is, or if they're feeling jealous or envious. And you know that envy is one of the 7 deadly sins of the Catholic tradition. So you're like, empathy is zero right now. So working with emotions and empathy throughout my life, from a place of, whoa, that's out of control, to, hey, I've got this managed, has been great. That's the center of what I do. And in my social science research, I also look at social signaling, social behavior, how it's moderated by emotion, and how not understanding emotions can make the whole thing fall apart.
So I want to ask a follow-up question, or maybe a couple of follow-up questions right out of the gates there, because two things. One is, how do we go about learning to identify our emotions? What is the process and the practice? That's the first one. And then a second one, I'll say it out loud so I don't forget it later, is what happens if you're numb to your emotions? How do you go about getting that uplifted?
Answers in one. It turns out that increasing your emotional vocabulary in terms of its granularity. So you're not just, I feel bad. That's not an emotion, okay? I feel stressed. That's not an emotion. There's emotions in there, but you need to learn them. And so what has been found in research is that all by itself, with no other intervention, increasing your emotional vocabulary will give you better emotion regulation skills, which is awesome, but also better emotion recognition skills. So if you've gone numb, which I understand that, right? It doesn't mean your emotions are gone. What it means is you just cut off awareness of them. Learning the words again is healing, no matter where you are in your emotional, kind of understanding level. And it's not only helps with emotion regulation all by itself, it's helping with neurological function, with heart function, and with function throughout your many systems. Knowing the names of words has some kind of magical power to it. I don't think they say that in the research. I don't think they say magical power.
But we will.
Well, no, it's research magic. But so I had made with my original book, The Art of Empathy, which was out in 2013, I had put together an emotional vocabulary list that I had been gathering for many years. And we've been working on it ever since. It's now free on my site. It's just called the Emotional Vocabulary List. And I think it's in 10 languages now. So people just come to my site and they say, would you like this in Polish? Yes, I would. Um, so it's kind of like um, this thing that I want to go out, right? It's always free, not not that kind of free where you give me your email. It's actual free, and it's like go out, fly, be free. Everybody learn more words for your emotions. So they're alphabetical by emotion and by intensity.
So
Um,
I think there's also some research or some theorists that say we feel our emotions in our bodies first. So could you speak to the importance of self-awareness as like an on-ramp to actually being able to name your feelings? Because so many somatic feelings we just ignore in our culture.
yes, and we're taught to ignore them.
Mm.
You know, I talked to a really good actor, and I said, when you go to play an emotion, what do you do? And he says the most important thing to do when playing emotion in Western culture is you have to hide it, right? So you would think an actor is a hack, right? When you went, I'm angry. Do you know what I mean? Or scared. You would think you're a bad actor. Um, the way that we do emotions in Western culture is mostly by repressing them or projecting them on others or pretending they're not there or exploding with them. So we tend not to have skills in emotion regulation.
Sounds totally dysfunctional at all, like
Yeah,
every which way.
super dysfunctional. And so it can be difficult to kind of, what am I feeling? Bad. I'm like, that's not an emotion. Okay. um, Beginning to get that vocabulary set, to check in. Is this an emotion or am I hungry? Like at first, you're just like a toddler trying to learn how to ride a bike. Like, wow, what does this do? And then eventually, but it is a learning process in a culture that teaches us to lie about and hide and repress and pretend about our unwanted emotions.
So are all the mindfulness practices, even yoga, forest bathing, all of those the ways in which we become quiet enough to actually sense our emotions? Is that the practice?
Can be some form of grounding and focusing is really helpful so you can turn down the static, of everybody else's needs and all the hustle bustle. One of the difficulties, though, with some forms of mindfulness is that they teach you to calm yourself and get centered and focus on what's happening and then let the emotion go. And I'm like, hold on, the first 3 steps were really good, but that emotion had something to say. Right. The emotion had something really important to say. Anger sets boundaries. Sadness helps you let things go. Fear is your intuition, right? Jealousy and envy are your sociological emotions that make sure that you're well positioned in your social world. They're crucial. All emotions are crucial, and they all come. Remember, they come to help you. They haven't created the problem. They come to help you deal with the problem. So if you're letting them go, like let them wash down the river. I'm like, I'm going to go downstream from you and catch those emotions because they're very good. It's like, don't waste it.
And so
Yeah.
not only does that interfere in interpersonal relationships, but I also know it's problematic from a health standpoint, right? As we suppress our emotions, it's showing up somewhere, and all sorts of immune disorders, cancers, mental health issues, all of those. I mean, you can't necessarily point a finger from one to the other, but they're connected.
Yeah. Um, and a lot of people might blame the emotions for that. They say angry people get heart attacks. I'm like, let's back off of that one. Why is that person needing a lot of anger? If anger sets boundaries, what is the situation in that person's life that's calling so much anger forward, right? There's boundary violations all over this person's life. That may leave them open to behaviors and situations that would then lead to heart problems, right? Instead of anger equals heart problems.
Now, earlier you made the connection between empathy and emotions, which is our capacity to read our own and others. I wonder whether or not there are different empathic styles, and if so, can people change? Is there a better empathic style to have than another?
Yeah, in the 6 aspects that my model, which I pulled mostly from the research in a bunch of different fields and put them together. The nice thing to know is that you can increase or calm down your empathy in any of the 6 aspects at any stage in your life. So that's really hopeful. So a lot of people there's a lot of attachment right now, and I'm part of the reason that happened with the empath title. And that is so eye-rolling at this point, it's become just hilarious. Person who very strongly identifies as an empath is a hyper empath in my terminology. They're over the top, and you want to get to that sweet spot in the middle. You can also be a hypo empath, but
What's that about empath?
hypo,
Yeah.
not enough, hyper, too much.
Hypo, okay.
Yeah.
On the bell curve. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, there's like a scale. And if people identify as I'm an empath, I'm a highly sensitive empath. I'm like, that's probably a problem because that's not a stable trait. Right? So you don't want to attach yourself as if that's a stable trait. Instead of saying, I'm an empath, say, I am hyper empathic, and it is likely because I'm getting too much emotion contagion and not enough emotion regulation. Like to be able to look at it as a system, as a process, as an interaction, instead of I am a hyper empath. Depends on where you are, right? A lot of people, there's like some things you're going to have zero empathy for. Do you know what I mean? You're going to have zero, and some things you're going to have 100. If you're comfortable with that level of empathy, don't change it. If you are, know that you can change. You can develop skills around this ability.
So an empathic style would be in those 6 levels?
I would say an empathic style might be in hypoempathy, medium empathy, hyper empathy. There's also another form of empathy that I've really been looking at a lot, and I'm calling it state matching. If you are a state matcher and someone is feeling an emotion, you might put it right on your little organism and feel alongside. If someone has hurt themselves, you may feel it in your body. That's state matching, where you really kind of lose the grounding of your own organism and you move into. When I don't know my left from my right. When I take any kind of movement course, I have to state match onto the teacher, right? I cannot listen to her say, now lift your right. I was like, nope, not listening. I have to be in her body or his body in order to make the movements until I learn it, right? So state matching is something I'll bring out, but I know a lot of hyper empathic people who are state matchers and it's out of control, right? They feel everything and they have no conscious awareness of the separateness of their own body and their own emotional realm. So, yeah, I mean, those are the styles I would see.
Those hyper empaths would follow the same process of gaining self-awareness of what they're feeling and understanding that there's a boundary between me as an experiencing person and you as someone I can see, and regulating, self-regulating, so that you're not necessarily in complete cohesion with that person's experience, right? Or what they're expressing.
Yeah, unless you choose to be, because there's times when it's wonderful to be boundaryless, like when you're in nature and you're forest bathing. I don't want to have a boundary up against that. That is awesome.
Right.
But I know that I'm doing it now instead of just being kind of an automaton who doesn't know what's happening in her own, organism. Yeah.
So the invitation I'm hearing is that if you do ascribe to being an empath, a highly sensitive person, it's you're suggesting that's not where it needs to end, and now you're a victim with that for the rest of your life. It's that okay, you do feel the feelings of others, but you don't have to, and there's mechanisms and practices to make boundaries.
Yeah, and to have choices and have agency, have
Mm.
agency in your own life. Um, when I work with people who are burnt out, empathic burnout is pretty serious, right? Um, I think a lot of people would just shut down. They'd shut down. They make the brick boundary, but that's not um, that's okay for right now. But what I try to get them back involved in is their empathy toward non-living things or toward non-human things. Because if empathy is your capacity to interact, you can have empathy with anything, right? You can have empathy with mathematics, horses, nature, music, philosophy, right? So help them find that thing that they have their empathy with that's not people, because people are they've learned to lie about their emotions and pretend, right? So there's a lot of steam coming off them that isn't healing steam that you want. So go toward the thing that you can be fully yourself with, and then close down a bit with people if they've been too much for you, right? So learn that articulation of self rather than I'm an empath. Well, sometimes you're not. So let's look at that. Um, be the person you are in a place that's safe and appropriate for you, and then take those skills and learn how to do that with people. It's a lot of, it's like a reframing
Mhm.
of who you are instead of cementing yourself in
And
that empath title.
and obviously, between people, one of the ways that we interface is through communication. So I'm just wondering, what are some of the suggested ways that we can practice or have empathic communication to communicate different things?
Um, there's a number of communication practices that I teach, but they all involve boundaries. Um, and one is called conscious complaining. If you are a sensitive or hyper empathic person, people will come up to you and just start. You cannot believe what my mother just told you, or told me. And even if you're on a bus with strangers, right? So you end up becoming a kind of shrine for the complaints of others. Like they just see it in you. And so I'm that person. So I created conscious complaining with a partner where you have to ask, Anita, do you have time for a conscious complaining session? And you have to say yes. It's like there's a boundary, there's a sort of a ritual to it. And you get 3 minutes, and I just listen and go, uh-huh, mm-hmm. I just support you that way. I don't give you advice. I don't fix it for you. It's 3 minutes, you're done. Then I do it, and you move into the position of the listener. And I teach that usually at retreats and workshops. And I ask people, what was it like to be able to complain and not be stopped, and not have advice and not have someone trying to fix you? And people are like, my life. And then I asked, okay, so what was it like for you to be the listener and not offer advice and know that you don't have to fix it? All you could do is just make space for the complaining. And people are like, a number of people, there's two answers. It's like, that was the most relaxing time I've ever had with another person. And other people said, I had to sit on my hands, not jump in and fix it for them. Right. So, complaining is kind of a taboo area. Stop complaining, do something about it, right? But it helps people begin to learn how to listen and how to speak. And one of the things about conscious complaining is that these are all the things that have been repressed. And if you understand the shadow, that's where the gold is. So they start their complaining and they're like, I don't even know what I'm doing. Hold on, I don't know what to complain about. And then by like 2 minutes 30, they're like, um, like the emotions come out, right? They come out to play. So that one's really fun. I love conscious complaining. Yeah, I have a number of empathic practices that are very protective of each partner so that it's not a burden for anybody, especially someone who's heading toward empathic burnout. Like this is a good one for people who are heading toward burnout. It can sometimes stop it in its tracks.
Because you have an outlet and yes, and you're bounded.
Emotions are free to speak.
Emotions
You know,
are.
our repressive culture, right? Yeah.
What would you say to parents who are raising the next generation and you want them to be healthy and happy? What do they need to know about their emotions and how to read their emotions with empathy and read the emotions of others with empathy?
We are creating a card set for kids, and it is a vocabulary set. For kids, we would have them choose their favorite words, you know, at whatever level they can understand. And it's almost like having trading cards. It's like, hey, mom, I feel angry, or I feel this, so that it can become sort of a family um, activity. And when kids have access to emotional vocabulary at the, you know, at what is right for their age and understanding level, it's kind of magical. We had a person here in our community, he's a dad of 6, and one of his kids is just a very, very emotive kid. And the child came in and was crying just in a way that his dad's like, what's happening? What's happening? And the child could not stop crying. And so, because they have it in their family, the dad just sort of went, there's an emotional vocabulary list. And the child could read. And so, slow down with the crying. He's like, okay, all right. And then he finds another one. And then he finds a third one. And then he goes, can we go for a bike ride? That was it. He found his emotions in the list, but also I think just sort of interpolating or extrapolating, he found that humans have these emotions. He named them, and just the process of naming them will help you regulate them. How simple is that? But I love it that the dad just went, ah, just look at this. I don't know what to do. And he was just able to settle in himself and just go, yeah, I want to go on a bike ride. And that was the end of it. He he worked it out himself. I was like, wow, I want to take these to the workplace, to our political lives. I want to take everybody. Donald Trump, take a look at this. What a difference it would make, that poor guy.
I just learned recently his nephew's come out with a book, and I understand that the father told his family, told his sons that laughter is a sign of vulnerability. So it's never occurred to me, but I've never seen that man laugh. And even people who have worked with him have acknowledged that they have never seen him laugh. So it's no wonder that he kind of has, made a big deal of Hillary's laugh once upon a time, and now Kamala's laugh. Yeah, I hear you.
Kamala's got a wonderful cackle. I
Yeah.
love to hear her laugh.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
great.
By the time this will come out, she'll still be campaigning. We won't know results yet, but maybe one day I'll come back to this when we're talking about it and say she won.
Oh,
Um, I always ask a question at the end of my podcast, but since we are talking about the new and revised version of your book, I wonder if you could hold it up again and maybe share a little bit about why there was a request to revive it and sort of what the new layer in this book is all about.
the request was from me. I'm like, please let me revise it. It's 13 years old. At the time, I did not understand the fear family very well. That's fear, anxiety, confusion, jealousy, envy, and panic, right? It's a big family. I did not have a separate chapter for anxiety because I mistakenly thought anxiety was a problem with fear. It's an entirely different emotion. And I learned that too late. So the whole fear family has gotten an update. And also, I've updated a number of the emotions where I didn't understand them as well as I do now, and I felt like this really needs to be fixed. So it was lovely that my publisher agreed, and I was able to bring in new research, new focus, take out some stuff that was okay at the time but needed to go. And just it's like a refreshed, it had a refresh and cleaned up and I think much more useful version because it's hard to understand emotions within this cultural context.
Well,
Right.
I'd like to unpack those six fear emotions because if you'd indulge this, only because I've noticed in the decade plus of teaching that anxiety has taken more and more space in the lives of young people that I teach. So could we cover those six? I think that's quite
Yeah.
interesting.
Fear is your instincts and your intuition about the present moment.
Mhm.
Anxiety is a forward-facing emotion that is highly involved in motivation, and it helps you um, plan ahead and hit your deadlines, gather everything you need. It is very much a do-it emotion. One of the huge problems with anxiety is that almost everybody I talk to, when I ask them, talk to me about anxiety, what's anxiety? They all describe panic. And this is one of the reasons that I thought anxiety was a problem. Um, Panic is the emotion that comes forward when your life is in danger. And it's got the four, sometimes five, sometimes six, but it's fight, flee, freeze, flock to safety. If your panic and your anxiety are together, and they're usually like this for people, they can't even get them apart. They don't even know that they're separate emotions. It usually means that the thing that needs to be done is so important that you may lose your job, you may lose your face, you may lose your, position in the world. So panic belongs there because you are in danger. But it's important to try to get these guys apart a little bit and ask your panic, am I literally in danger of death right now? And the panic says, no, but hold on, but then you can, once you've got panic more into like what is really going on, not that panic was ever wrong, but it's that you could lose your job if you don't get your act together. So then you can ask the anxiety questions, is like, what do I need to do? Do I need help? Have I ever done anything like this before? Where's the stopping point? Like you can begin to articulate what's going on if you can get panic a little bit moved aside. Not because panic is odious, but because these are two extremely energetic emotions, and they can pull you forward. You can just sort of fall forward and lose your grounding and your footing and your ability to focus on the present moment. Um, so that's those two.
So I think
And
about students who are writing exams and or like have a end of semester tons of work to do and they're freaking out, or they got a bad mark and they're worried about their GPA, and then they're worried about getting into grad school and then getting the job at the KPMG, all of that. I like these questions about, can anxiety identified lead you to a plan of action? That's a helpful reframe. And then let's walk it back if you're feeling panic because you are not going to die based on these grades. Are there other I'm thinking what happens when a student can be walked back from panic, but is feeling anxious and actually can't mobilize towards doing something different that would, lift the anxiety a bit.
yeah, I have a practice. There's a number of practices for anxiety, and one of the ones that is really strange in the research is make a list. It's so weird to like make a list. No. But what that does, first of all, writing is an action that can help, get some of that hyperactivation out. Um, but also it's a way to almost siphon some of your short-term memory. So if you just sit with your anxiety and stew, your short-term memory is too full and you may lose your focus. So it's important to list it or mind map it, whichever works best for your neurology. But what are the deadlines? What is this? That can give your brain a rest. And now it's not clogged with everything that you're holding about. Okay, sociology exam is on Tuesday, I have to read these 15 things. It shouldn't be here. It's important to be able to get it out on paper. And list making is its own kind of, magic. There's a lot of different ways to do it.
And that also kind of coincides with what you were saying earlier, but just the granularity of being able to name the emotion actually allows some of the energy to
settle.
Almost.
Yeah, it sort of dissipates, but it also settles. Another thing to do is if something you're really anxious about is putting down, sociology 101 exam. Talk about how you're feeling: anxious, ashamed, angry. Just writing them down means that you're allowing yourself to be heard, and you can be like that child. Now you want to go for a bike ride?
Right.
You know what I mean? It can be that quick because we learn to repress and stew and lie about our emotions and, try to pretend they're not there. There's so much going on inside us, it can get clogged in there. And writing things down or speaking them if you don't like handwriting or typing about them, it's literally physically and emotionally healing. And it's so simple.
That's really powerful because I think we can relate to, the big report that's due, whether it's at school or in the workplace. But what do you do about generalized feelings of sort of, everybody has more than I do, or be more beautiful, I'm slimmer, like all of these ways in which we compare ourselves. So naming the emotions that we're feeling is a very, very helpful way to manage them. That's excellent. That's sort of the meta takeaway from this conversation that I'm getting. So, Karla, thank you so much for your time. I have a final question for you. I love asking this of my guests. And that is if you can think of a time when you were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for you.
This is something that just happened last month. My brother was found unconscious in his apartment. It was 97 degrees. And we think he probably had heat stroke. And he's been in the hospital, ICU. Now he was in a skilled nursing facility, right? And I'm his durable power of attorney. And that only kicks in when a person is injured or dead, right? Oh no, maybe not dead. Anyway, so I got nothing. He can't remember any of his passwords. I don't know anything. His house was a mess. Like I was completely in the dark. And I called and people generally were lovely to me. I called the hospital, the pharmacy, the pharmacist. I'm not saying which one it is because they all kind of did something bad, which is they gave me the information that I needed without seeing my durable power of attorney, without anything. They helped me. And I was like, we don't know what we're doing. He can't speak. Nothing's working here. And they're like, okay, he takes this. He takes it 3 times a week. He does this, and it was so wonderful because they treated him and me as important humans instead of focusing on the needs of the system of a bureaucratic system, right? And I was very sweet to all of them and told them exactly, if they send me those things, how was your service today? I'm like, 1,000.
And some rules are meant to be broken.
Yeah, it was really wonderful because I knew I was going into a bureaucratic system, and those aren't empathic.
Indeed.
You have to have the people in them.
Indeed. Obviously, she understood the feelings that you were having, and or I'm assuming it's a she. She might not have been a she. How's your brother right now?
He's in a board and care. He is cognitively impaired. And so we're in that process of figuring out what's next.
Got it.
Yeah.
I wish you the best with that. I wish you the best with your revised edition. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with me, Karla. It was really great to have this conversation. I'm going to talk more about the granularity of my emotions and teach a few words to my daughter as a result. So thank you.
And go get the free emotional vocabulary list.
Yes, from karlamclaren.com. Is that right?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for watching and listening. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy. Thank you so much for watching or listening to another episode of Purposeful Empathy, a show that is dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who understand that the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Please now consider subscribing or buying a copy of Purposeful Empathy. Thanks again. Have a great day.